So, from one sci-fi classic to another, today it's Soylent Green from 1973, starring Charlton Heston and based on the 1966 novel Make Room, Make Room by Harry Harrison. It deals with the themes of overpopulation, pollution and environmental disaster, and it's set in the year 2022. So I suppose I should have reviewed this film last year.
I did. Hey guys, it's Matt. Let's hope that Dave Cullen is a good sport about this. First, the niceties. Of all the movie reviewers, the only one that even has a clue as to what's going on and questions what Hollywood, Disney, Netflix, Amazon Prime is putting forth, the only one that has a clue in this matter is Dave Cullen. Okay? Yes, the magenta, the color got my attention. Let's not be first grade truthers and say, oh, he must be in on something. No, the color bleeds through reality as well as being planted. I'm showing you this off the bat because I thought it was awfully strange that when I searched for this video, which he does a very good review of Soylent Green, the two back-to-back were both, at least in the presentation, how YouTube presents them to people in the list, both magenta presentations. If Dave's listening to this, he already thinks we're quite insane, and it would take a long time to bring you up to speed on that, Dave. So, yeah, I'm gonna break down what he's saying because he's the closest of all these movie reviewers to just getting a sense that the world does not work the way the high school history teacher told you or the way the news presents it. But he's like, hey, everybody would. You make the same mistakes unless you've been doing the sorts of research that we've been doing for 10 years. You always look in the bookends for the answer. Always look in that same toy box. And Dave, it's the last time I'll address you directly. I hope you're a good sport about this. The answers to how this very strange and bizarre world works is not inside the reality bookends. You have to look way outside. So this is interesting because you can sense here that Dave is going much farther in terms of any of these other movie reviewers who don't have a clue as to how the world works, just repeat the same old things over and over, which Dave does not. The movie reviewers say, the writers hate the fans. The writers and the showrunners, they hate the source material. They didn't do the research. No, the world doesn't work like that. The corporations, Netflix, Amazon, Disney, whoever it may be, that put forth this horrible programming, Dave, if you're still listening, it's all on purpose. They know exactly what they're doing, and profits do not come first. It takes about 10 years to explain that. I understand that would sound insane to you. Either way, this is a very interesting breakdown because you can sense he's getting close, but without the work that we have done as to how the world works, he will not be able to put all the pieces together. And intelligence has nothing to do with it. Listen to Dave's presentation. Probably smarter than I am, one of the smartest people you'll come across. Presentation is completely professional, well-researched. It has nothing to do with education or intelligence. It has to do with opening your mind, expanding your field of view as to how this world really works, abandoning and throwing out everything you know and have been told, and then putting in about 10 years of research. So to him, what I'm saying sounds incredibly arrogant. Who knows if he's throwing rubber duckies or not listening to me? There's no way it's not going to sound arrogant. Like, who is this son of a bitch to come along and tell me? I have no other way to put it. It takes years, Dave, to drop veils to see how the world really works. And nothing works the way the news, governments, or authority says. If that sounds conspiratorial to you, it is. So let's start. It would help if you remember a little bit about the movie Soylent Green. Don't have to remember much about it if you haven't seen it in the last 20 or 25 years. If you have no idea what it's about, I'll do 45 seconds on the back end. I still think you'll be able to follow along. But the purpose of this video is to show you how Dave is presenting it and to show that he's not able to put all the pieces together because he lacks the information as to some of the things we have researched about how this system really works or is run. He probably has no idea what Agenda 21 is, Agenda 2030, things like that. Okay, last time I'll say it, last proviso, this is in full respect to Dave, the only movie reviewer that I still watch. I'll watch some Critical Drinker because he's funny, but he doesn't have a clue as to what's really going on, where Dave gets a sense that some things are just not as they seem. Okay, enough of that, Matt. 45 seconds or less on Soylent Green if you haven't seen it or don't remember it. It's called 1973 Ecological Dystopian Sci-Fi Thriller Charlton Heston, set in the year 2022. All the cities are overcrowded, horrible smog, pollution, there are no resources, there are no culinary delights. You have to be the ultra-rich to get a piece of meat or to get an apple or to get a bottle of wine. Everybody's just given these wafers to eat, these blue wafers or these yellow wafers or red. At the end, they're given Soylent Green, which is the focus of the entire movie as to what this really is. Everybody lives on top of each other. It's horrible circumstances. It's a basically police state, probably curfews at night. I don't remember all of it myself. Youth in Asia centers where you just are trying to get as many people as possible to commit assisted suicide, so they are no longer a tax on the resources of the system. Well, 15 seconds or less, Charlton Heston is involved in, there's a murder. Somebody high up in the Soylent Corporation has been killed. Per the investigation, Charlton Heston eventually finds out that this Soylent Green wafer is recycled bodies, as you get the famous crying out in the night, "Soylent Green is people!" There's actually an alternative ending that was in a very limited DVD release. If you're ever at a flea market that has old DVDs or even a yard sale, and you can find the old Soylent Green with the alternative ending, it was only probably released for a few months, maybe only 10,000 exist. He cries out in the end instead of Soylent Green is people. Soylent Green is Ronald McDonald! It's in an alternative ending. If you can find it, it's a real keeper.
The film tells the story of Thorne's investigation into the death of a rich lawyer named William R. Simonson, who was murdered, and in the process, Thorne uncovers a wider conspiracy. He was a member of the board of the Soylent Corporation. The further he investigates, the more the bodies start stacking up as the terrifying truth is being covered up by powerful people, and Thorne soon finds his own life is in danger due to his unwillingness to drop the case. The electricity frequently switches off, and the lights dim, so a person has to make use of a bicycle generator to produce power for their home and keep the lights on. And they have to collect water from communal water fonts with everyone else. Mask wearing is even commonplace, although people aren't wearing them because they fear catching something, but because of the air pollution. Only the elite can afford to live in large, luxurious homes.
Now, there's so much there just in the last 45 seconds or so, where Dave, if you were listening to this, we would say, when you see the world or go back and even watch an old movie with the sort of eyes that we have now, after the research we've done, you see things completely different. Sometimes there's a whole nother meaning that would be missed by the popcorn crunchers or anybody that just goes in to see the movie that's looking for things at first level, pure entertainment. Everything you just said there in the movie itself is classic Agenda 21, Agenda 2030. And let's just back up even further. The movie is predictive programming. Not where they really believe the world is going, but actually where, quote, they want to take the world. Now, this gets awfully conspiratorial. And right off the bat, if Dave would be listening, he'd be saying, well, wait a second. You're inferring that there is some group on high that put a message out in the movie, and the writers and directors just went along with the message that some creepy table put for it. You know, it's so, I'm trying to kind of balance this, guys, and it can't be done. I mean, Dave is going to think this is absolutely insane. I should just stop trying and simply talk to you, which I'll do going forward. It's classic Agenda 21. The lights flicker, the electricity is erratic, so you get on a bike in your home, or those that are lucky enough to have a little apartment, and you can put juice back in your own generator. It was Edward G. Robinson, I guess, is Charlton Heston's roommate, gets on a bike and pedals to create electricity. Now, is this in the exact Agenda 21, Agenda 2030 document? And if I was going to continue to try to talk to Dave, I mean, how could I possibly bring him up to speed on how Agenda 21 and Agenda 2030 is put forth to the masses? Oh, it's just a nice green movement and bike lanes and open space parks. And when you get into the sinister nature of how they're trying to hoard what they call the human being into these population centers, like the way New York is depicted in Soylent Green, and the rest of the world, or the rest of the United States, other than the population centers, would be like a nature preserve. But if you could go back to the Glenn Beck book, again, there's a lot of truth in the old Graduated Animal Farms. The old Glenn Beck book about Agenda 21, one of the first scenes I remember reading it was you have to bike, you have to pedal. And the book is called Agenda 21. You have to pedal for your own electricity. Everything is a green movement. See, not to protect the earth. Okay, there are, you could, at some point you could even argue that the creeps want to protect the environment with these huge swaths of areas where, under Agenda 21, Agenda 23rd, and those that have studied the sinister nature of it, where, quote, human beings can't be, but it's not done for that purpose primarily. It's done to cull or to cattle the human population. Predictive programming is in thousands of different movies and TV shows and art presentations. And it doesn't necessarily mean that New York City is going to look exactly like Soylent Green is depicted in 2022. Most of the times it's what they would want it to look like, what they want for population centers of human beings. They're almost always behind schedule. But that doesn't mean in the dystopian movies and art presentations that they put out, they're not going to show you truly what they want. If anybody like Dave's really listening, 15 seconds or less, politics as you know it doesn't exist, elections as you know it doesn't exist. There aren't countries all work together. As a movie reviewer, go see the famous scene from John Nash, A Beautiful Mind, and he was given the Nobel Prize based on a system of collusion that exists today, where everyone wins if everyone works collectively. And it's not Darwinism as much as in the movie, it's Adam Smith. Everybody competes against each other, and that's the best for the economy, where John Nash completely flipped that and said, no, what's best is if we work for ourselves and work for our neighbors. And that's what exists today. I can't. Matt, stop trying to bring Dave or anybody up to speed. It takes 10 years. I hear you. I'll stop. But just in what Dave said for 45 seconds, there's so much there. Again, the lights flicker. You get on your bike. Create the power yourself. Green movements, under the false guise of green movements, it just meant to put populations of real humans into a certain way of living under false pretenses. They're doing it now out our window with the green movement. The predictive programming of the masks presented because of pollution, but those that study reality, what is coming in the future is almost always predictively programmed in certain types of art, especially dystopian movies. So this is going way too far for somebody that's new or someone like Dave, but somebody in our group would say the masks as presented in Soylent Green is because of what would be coming in 2020 with C the V. We're not in these circles. We're not even allowed to say the words. Or our could you imagine if Dave, folks, is listening to what I just said and said, so it's just like Don Johnson when Django and the Dr. Schultz came. Let me get this straight. You and Yoji, let me get this straight. You came all the way up here, no appointment, no nothing. You saying that they put something in a movie in 1973 as a predictive element as to what they knew would be coming in 2020? Yes, and I understand that's probably the craziest thing anybody's ever said, and you should be turning this video off because we've already been deemed to be out there like Pluto. So it must be a little confusing to him or anyone else going, the person seems to be somewhat sane and competent, yet this is making no sense. The last element that Dave said just in that 45-second clip was only the elite. And he does use the word elite, which is interesting. Only the elite live well. And that is part of where they want to take the future, whether it's officially or unofficially part of Agenda 21 is part of 2030, and that's not the end-all be-all either. It's just incremental steps for their ultimate agenda that they haven't shared with us yet or haven't put out in a UN white paper. But only the high elite live well. So there's always a further separation between the ultra-poor and those that are just getting by with little wafers of Soylent Green or whatever, and the ultra rich. That this person depicted in the movie, they have access to meat, they have access to wine, liquor, and women just come and go. He has a live-in, a girl that just lives in the house, like a cushion would be in the house. So you have a huge divide between the super rich and the super poor, and those that think we that run in our circles are just crazy. What's happening right now out your window? The top billionaires gain $250 billion of net worth, $250 billion, when supposedly everybody's locked away in 2020, when supposedly people weren't buying anything but Amazon. They just happened to be buying what those top billionaires were selling. What a coincidence. When everybody's locked away and the economy should be completely tanking, the top billionaires get $250 billion. You're not saying, you conspiracy people, saying that was by design. No. I would never. See, the proof is in the pudding. Are we really crazy conspiracy people if it happened? See, hard to kind of fight against what happened. Well, Matt, I'll fight against why it happened. Okay, make up whatever you want. But at some point, it doesn't make sense when the whole world is locked away and nobody can go do anything or spend any money, yet the top billionaires go $250 billion richer. Does that make sense on the ground level? No. Well, then maybe something else is going on in this world. Anyway. So you have, just in the 45 seconds that, I could speak to the Agenda 2030 relationship or the Agenda 21 relationship. And again, guys, what they put out in Agenda 21 or Agenda 30, people could come along and say, oh, they're behind schedule. They're always going to be behind schedule. I don't think they're getting the timing wrong. I just think they're putting it out incrementally. Their patience is inhuman, as we know. Those first-grade truthers that think, whoa, we're all going to be culled by 2021, we're all going to be in population centers like Soylent Green, they understand they're not going to get that timing right. Nevertheless, they put their little white papers out, and people in our community follow it. It's not a bad idea to see what your enemy's up to, right?
Furthermore, while the rich consume fresh, clean water and a diverse and wide-ranging diet of healthy foods, most people are eating what Roth describes as tasteless, odorless crud, a highly processed, mass-produced synthetic food in the form of some kind of wafer or cracker. But now the planet is suffering from a constant greenhouse effect. The film certainly contained some elements of today's political environmental messaging. None of the hysterical environmental alarmism of the film ever came true, of course.
In fairness, Dave is saying just look out your window, that it's not the world of Soylent Green with constant smog. And Soylent Green does present that a tree might not even exist in New York City, or even a blade of grass. And Dave's saying, well, that didn't come true. But one key thing to talk about is the way he put that. He might have said environmental alarmism. I'm not sure. I don't remember. Something like that. But that did come true. Not when you look out your window, but in terms of how all governments around the world working together with quasi-government entities, the United Nations, whatever it might be, they have implanted that incredible alarmism in the population in terms of words that I can't even say directly. At least I'll get a banner ad, probably still load, but who wants the banner ad saying go here for the real information, not listen to this freak? So we'll say in terms of, what was it? Primate, like monkeys, primate change and global charming. In terms of those issues, Al Gore had several speeches. He said New York City would be by 2013, 2014, or 2015 at the latest. Al Gore, who I respect immensely and who should have been president of the United States. Boy, what an incredible situation we would be in now if that were to have occurred. He said New York would be underwater. So yes, the alarmism, they thought that. No, he didn't think that. It's all about creating the alarmism so then they can do what they want to do to humanity. It's pretty simple. So again, Dave and a few others that may have picked this video up are doing a Big Daddy. Big Daddy from one of my favorite movies, so Django Unchained. Let me get this straight. You came all the way out, no appointment, no nothing. Let me get this straight. they didn't think any of the environmental disaster would happen, but they implanted it, or purposely implanted it, into the minds of potentially billions. And then it even gets worse on the back end. You know what they do? They go about on the back end creating the circumstances that match their predictions. They try in a way to make it so on the back end to a degree. What? So wait, let me get this straight. So where they want to take human populations, they predictively program and put out in art, movies, media, and all different forms. That's where they really want to take society. Then, in different ways, they implant the alarmism that, say, matched up in this case with Soylent Green via front figures or really pathetic frontmen like Al Gore. They do all that stuff on the back end. And every news program for 10 years in a row, Don the Lemon comes forth and says, primate change. And he says, global charming. And the world news, it's over and over and over again. It was like when they did Zika, 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 Zika before the Brazil Olympics. And then they know that that's not really out your window, and they know they're going to be late in what they're calling their predictions, but then they work hard on the back end to actually make it so and facilitate the predictions that they already made. Yes, that's not crazy at all if you've been doing the research we've been doing.
I certainly find certain aspects of this story quite relevant to some of the things we're being prepared for today in the real world, because in this 1973 interpretation of 2022, real meat is a rare luxury. Something that certain organizations in the real world are telling us will happen in the future, apparently. Even now, plant-based fake meat and lab-grown synthetic beef are being touted to replace healthy real meats.
He says relevant to some of the things we are being prepared for today. I told you, Dave is the only one who has a clue. All the other movie reviewers are completely gone. I don't expect him to be exactly where we are, but he senses these things.
The society depicted in this film has certainly had its expectations of living standards and quality of living drastically reduced. He asks Thorne, how did it come to this? Indeed, life has become so dreadful that assisted suicide has become the norm in this world of Soylent Green.
Yes, he's exactly right, and very interesting how he put that. Expectations of living standards drastically reduced. They love to do this in their art, media, movies, and TV shows. It's part of Stalled Century. It's part of predictive programming. It's part of keeping the population centers happy. If you show somebody Soylent Green, and they know as they're watching it, as they watch it over the last 30 years, it's 2022. And then we get to 2022, and it's not as bad as Soylent Green, even though basically going to the grocery store now, what do you get, like 4 apples for $10? But still, people generally have the money to get decent food, and your Wendy's, chicken sandwich is decent. It's not just crawling away as you open up your bun. I mean, but see, relative to Soylent Green, things are great today. And don't think they don't know that doesn't play on one's subconscious unconscious. Think of all the dystopian things they've put forth. I mean, just, thousands and thousands of things. Dystopian view of the future. The Walking Dead. Fear the Walking Dead. I Am Legend. I mean, we go on and on and on. Well, Matt, they just want to sell and make profits. Oh, sure, I forgot. It has nothing to do with an agenda. See, Dave, or if anybody's new here, the people here see the agenda. That's awfully conspiratorial. It is. That's the point. There is an agenda, and this is, they're playing multidimensional chess at the very checkers level, the very basic tic-tac-toe level. If they can show somebody what the future looks like in 2022, or whenever they said Skynet would become alive in the Terminator, and then your life now is better than that, even though you should be complaining and bitching about what is being served up to you now, and it's $100 for an apple in the grocery store, your subconscious, unconscious, the much more powerful part of us has seen these movies and these dystopian presentations, said, well, you know what? It's actually pretty good because it's not as bad as that. Could be much worse. Of course, their agenda is much more sophisticated than this, but they do this basic tactic as well. It's basically it's not Einstein theory of relativity, but in their weird way, they use relativity to keep the population satisfied, where the population will always be reminded of how bad it really could be. It's a first grade tactic, but they use it.
Most of the population appears to be dependent on the government for their basic needs, an ideal way for tyranny to function. They need food coupons and financial assistance to get by. Sounds like UBI or something.
Dave says something there that's just first grade to us, but people in the normal world wouldn't even see it like Dave does. Just saying, the more you can get people relying on the government for absolutely everything, then tyranny can then run wild. And Dave, how many of your cousins would say that? How many of your friends or your people down the cul-de-sac would say that? Of course, it's first grade to us. The more you can get gigantic population centers reliant on the authority or on the government, then those people have no say. They have to do and bow down to whatever the Shanghai Politburo puts forth. But most people, I'm saying your friends or your uncle, they would say, well, Matt, look, I know those systems aren't perfect, and I know there's tons of corruption and waste, but the root of it just stems from people trying to help. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. People might get helped as a side benefit or some tertiary crumb that falls on the floor, but that is not why government benefits go out. They go out because as they add up, people then cannot walk away and will be forced to do whatever eventually they're told to do. But this is why government benefits exist at the screen level or not milk level. If you go research the origins of throw a dart, the NHS, or of welfare in the United States, or whatever it may be, you'll see people on the ground organizing, trying to help. If you put them on a lie detector test, they're not going to say, oh, you caught me. I was really working for the sinister element here on Earth that stands in the shadows behind Satan and the screen. They're going to say, no, I'm doing this to help. They wouldn't even know ultimately how they're being used. I understand that's the craziest thing of all time. It takes about 10 years to understand that. If you research the origin of many government benefits around the world, the people that eventually took the streets and put it in place or built the infrastructure, those people actually may have wanted to help. But that's not ultimately what the screen is doing it for, or what we call not milk, and things that can't be understood unless you've been running in our circles for 5 or more years.
It's important to say that in the future depicted in this film, it appears most of planet Earth is no longer lush, beautiful, and green. Vegetation and trees are rare, if not non-existent. Idyllic countryside, forests, and clean oceans are a thing of the past. The planet is in rough shape, though we don't get a clear picture of what most of the rest of the planet actually looks like. It's most likely barren and desolate with no more growth.
No, Dave, you cannot go there if you understand how these creeps work. Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, agendas we haven't seen yet. It's actually just the opposite is likely. It wants you to infer, it wants the moviegoer to infer that there's probably not a blade of grass anywhere in the world. And that's why people in Charlton Heston's New York City have to live the way they do. But if you really study Agenda 21, Agenda 30, and other documents, it's likely that just outside the city limits is a beautiful, lush green with every sort of plant, tree, animal. This is not, Dave or anybody that may be listening to this is not ridiculous conspiracy. In their own documents, you can see how they want population centers. And in their own documents, they'll show you how 90% or 95% of the United States, they would want off limits to the human population. So there's so many, quote, they call humans in New York City, they've trampled down every single blade of grass. Maybe they've eaten every single tree. But if you understand the way these creeps work, those that really, quote, run the world, I hate to say, but that's what exists now, if they ever had their success where population centers are crammed in, as it's shown in Soylent Green in New York, This is not much different than District 12 or District 11 in the Hunger Games. It's not a conspiracy because it's in their own documents. No, they haven't achieved it yet, but that doesn't mean it's not where they want it to go. That's the predictive programming element in old movies. The Agenda 21, Agenda 30, they didn't write these documents 6 months before they released them. They wrote them 50 years before releasing them. So this is no question. Anybody that's done the work would say, absolutely, Matt. There's no doubt just outside of Charlton Heston's New York is a lush green for potentially 1,000 miles with every sort of plant and animal, etc. It's only those conditions that exist in the population centers. This is in line with their own documents. They're not going to present that as a public service announcement for the movie. They want people who see the movie to believe that, oh, everything on Earth, there's no grass, everybody has to live off of these wafers. But all of it, in terms of what they present, these real documents per the UN, you're not going to get people to do this on their own. It's all done via climate emergency presentation, where if we don't do these population centers, it's better than all life on Earth coming to an end. Of course, it's ridiculous climate, alarmist tactics, all done. Every move they make will be done under the auspices of that.
The visuals presented to Roth in his final moments are of what the Earth used to be when he was young.
Nope. The visions that he sees in the assisted suicide center is the visions of nature that exist right then and there in the movie Soylent Green, outside of the population centers. Now, in presenting the movie, did they expect that everybody in there popping their crunch corn, crunching their popcorn? Matt, that's a sign of insanity when you keep doing that, or dementia. They expect people will think the whole world is desolate. They might even want people to believe the whole world is desolate. But if you've seen Soylent Green, by the way, if you haven't seen it, it is an incredibly well done movie on 10 different levels. But the assisted suicide center where Roth is in there, and the beautiful scenes of nature and birds all around him, and they say you get 15 minutes and then that's it. I guess they give him lethal injection, I'm not sure. And beautiful scenes of nature. This is them, these creeps, in my opinion, patting themselves on the back. Because ultimately, if they can herd the people into these population centers per whatever their next, they'll come out with Agenda 2040 next, 2050. And again, it's not like, well, they missed their mark. They missed their mark. They know they missed their mark. Okay, that's just, forget about it. Of course, they didn't get every single metric they wanted to in Agenda 21. That doesn't mean they don't know they didn't miss their mark. And the real agenda is Agenda 2060 or 2100, whatever it may be. They're patting themselves on the back in that assisted suicide scene, saying, see, by hurting all the humans, which is just to them just low, it's Fiddlin' Ben's low, you are to them. By herding them into the population centers, then they'll pat themselves on the back and say, look how we brought back nature. That shit exists just probably 10 miles outside the city. That's the part of Soylent Green that no popcorn cruncher will ever understand or realize, bringing in the Agenda 2030 and all the crap that we've studied over the years.
The reality is the ocean is dying. There isn't enough plankton to actually produce the Soylent food, so human bodies are being used instead. Soylent Green is people.
Now, Dave presents that as a fact, but how do you know that there's not enough plankton because the oceans are dying, so they're really using people? Well, you could see how horrific the regime is. We just see the bosses above Charlton Heston, and they're all corrupt. They're all scumbags. Who do you think's at the very top? The rich are assholes. So he for some reason, I don't know why Dave's putting forth that this Soylent Corporation's trying to do the right thing. Why would one ever believe that they were trying to use what's good, the plankton, but they had to go to bodies? Based on the way the regime, the totalitarian assholes are presented, where there's not one nice thing about authority or government, why wouldn't one assume it's always been people and the corporation never tried to do the right thing? Am I missing something here?
The film ends in a rather unsatisfying and abrupt way. It's not clear if Thorne survives, and although his boss promises to contact the exchange and present the evidence that Soylent Green is indeed people, it's not clear if he was just humouring Thorne or not, so we never find out if justice was ever done, if the conspiracy was ever exposed, and if the technocratic system that people live under was ever dismantled.
What? Look, Soylent Green shows us that the entire society is not just corrupt from top to bottom. Those that we see interacting with Charlton Heston, okay, he is the star. You have to have a protagonist you like. And even he's partially corrupt, throwing himself onto that young girl and stealing things from where he investigates crimes. Even he is despicable in many ways, but he has to be somewhat likable, or not one person would have ever gone and seen the movie. You not just have corruption from top to bottom, you have evil in a society from top to bottom. Bring out the scoops. They're calling in the scoops. These giant backhoe things are just throwing bodies, real people, into just crushing people. What indication would there be that there's even that society in any way would have a good element that could transform itself? Okay, maybe Charlton Heston exposed it. Exposed it to who? There's nowhere to go with your gripe or your claim. His bosses, what do you mean it's unclear if his bosses followed up to bring the corruption down? His bosses were corrupt. Who are they going to go to? Oh, there's a whole good element in the government that brought you the scoops that are, we didn't know that was happening. We're going to change. No, it's clear as day that everybody in the whole society and government is tied in with the Soylent Corporation, and they're all doing it together. There isn't a 1/1,000,000th chance there was any reform. This is so crystal clear. I'm struggling for a analogy or a story that would, like, okay, some cities have trash services that they work for the city. It's not independent. You don't choose your own. They're all city workers, and Rodney Dangerfield and reminded us. I don't know if you understand who runs that business, but I assure you it's not the Boy Scouts. Let's just say that you had gripes against the trash service in a certain city. They were stealing off people's lawns. You went to complain to their bosses, but obviously they were in on it, and they wouldn't pick you up for 2 weeks. And all this corruption, they were actually running drugs off the back of their trash trucks. All this stuff with the trash. Okay, so you go to City Hall, and this would be if the world were like Soylent Green. Oh, your claim, sir, your gripe against the trash service? Yes, we have somebody right down the hall here who will hear your claim and your concerns. And what is his name? Count Dracula. There's nobody to go to. And if you do seek out somebody to go to, they'll lead you down the hall to Dracula's office, who's the top one that's in on it. The trash men are taking bodies to Dracula. So there's nobody to complain to, obviously, in the world of Soylent Green. It's that evil and corrupt.
I have to say, I don't like this movie at all, because I get the feeling there's a not-so-subtle agenda and political message behind the film that I find detestable, to say the least, because it depicts a bleak future dystopia based on completely bogus environmental alarmism propaganda. The disgusting message being, humans are bad for the environment. This is a 1973 film attempting to present a vision of 2022 that ultimately never happened and was never going to happen.
Hey, I have to applaud that, what he just said. How many movie reviewers would go there, would dare to even mention something like that, would even use the words environmental alarmism? I have to applaud that. Again, no fault of his own. He hasn't been down in the rabbit hole with us, but to truly see why a movie like Soylent Green exists, you have to be able to, look in the strange places we've looked.
Of course, in reality, the environmental movement, still to this day, is basically telling us that everything humans do and consume is bad for the planet. We should reduce our living standards, increase our taxes, own nothing, stop eating meat, live in a pod, eat the bugs, ridiculous stuff. What I really don't like about this movie is that if you think about it, it's basically saying that although the shocking truth behind Soylent Green may be truly awful, there's a subtle suggestion that there's no choice left but to embrace cannibalism.
Yes, that is an excellent point. Is the subconscious, unconscious takeaway from anybody that has seen that movie or that remembers that movie through the last 20 years when all the governments around the world are pushing primate, that's like a monkey, change. They're pushing that. Does one subconscious think back to Soylent Green and say, "Oh, we better do what Al Gore says," or whatever the Obama administration and Santa Claus Schwab is pushing forth, because the subconscious might be saying, we might have to end up eating Soylent Green, and you know what that is. So even though I don't want to do this, we better err on the side of just doing what the Al Gore organization wants. Who knows how it plays on our subconscious, unconscious? At the very first grade level, Soylent Green, the movie, is saying, this is kind of where humanity's headed if you don't do what the Al Gore organization wants. And look, they're eating people. So you better get your ass in shape. But then again, nothing in terms of what they present. They're not really worried about these things. It's not legitimate because they're completely inconsistent. I mean, look at the SUVs are still gigantic, and the Tahoes and the Escalades, and they're completely inconsistent, and the people that drive them are inconsistent. They'll recycle every little thing, and then they'll get into their giant Escalade, and that sort of we'll talk about it some other time. All of that confusion and inconsistent message is also by design. Not tactics are not to be underestimated. This is a hardcore, pipe-hidden entity that's an evil genius and in the extreme. We're almost never at its level in analyzing what it's truly up to.
It's not like there was plenty of plankton left to make the Soylent Green, but the Soylent Corporation just got too greedy and they started cutting corners, and it was cheaper and easier for them to use dead bodies instead. That would be something, because then the story would be about Thorne exposing this corporate greed and corruption. But in actual fact, the Soylent Corporation had no choice. Admittedly, they didn't tell the population that they were feeding them people, probably because they knew that people wouldn't accept it. But the Soylent Corporation were clearly determined to continue to feed people one way or the other. And the only recourse left to them was to resort to using human bodies in their production of Soylent Green. There wasn't anything else to use, so in a sense, the Soylent Corporation almost come across as being benevolent.
Oh no. What did he say? Look, the first part of Dave's presentation is saying this is the worst case scenario. Well, it would be greed if they could continue to use plankton as Soylent Green was advertised, but the plankton harvesting from the ocean, even if it was in abundant supply, that costs a lot of money. So if you just use people, then that increases their profits. He's saying if it was greed, that would be really bad. But he's saying, hey, it's clear that the plankton populations in the ocean were like zero. So like he's letting them off the hook. What other choice did Soylent Corporation have than to feed people? And he says almost benevolent. Oh, no. You didn't, Dave. Come on, man. First off, let's just go back to the basics. What evidence is there as the society and culture is presented inside Soylent Green? What evidence is there that there's a good element anywhere in the society? At the corporate level, at a local city hall, at the chief of police level, at the detective level. There isn't one good element inside all of society and culture as Soylent Green presents itself. How could anybody come to the conclusion that somebody inside that society culture would be trying to do the right thing? And would feeding people be trying to do the right? I don't even know how to respond to this. Let's just move on. I don't like to use the word non sequitur because I don't even really know what it means. But this reasoning is non sequitur in terms of what I understand that word to mean. Fallatiologic. And one other thing related to what I said a few minutes back. Okay, maybe most of the movie-going audience believes that the rest of the world is desolate and there is no plankton left and the oceans are all dead, but we don't know that. If you know anything about Agenda 21, Agenda 30, it's more likely in their own documents that the population centers are hell on earth, and the oceans are teeming with real aquatic life, and the forests are at the pinnacle of their beauty and natural. There's no evidence whatsoever. You can't just assume that the whole world is desolate. All they show you is the population center. Their own documents allude to the fact that the natural world is at its absolute peak outside the population centers.
Is this another message of the film? That in the end, if things get really bad environmentally, we might have to end up resorting to cannibalism? Is the film meant as a warning? If it is, it's based entirely on a fictitious scaremongering narrative.
And now I'm really confused, because then Dave goes back, flip-flops back to saying something just great that I'm so glad he said, and that's exactly right. Of course, it's scaremongering, but what somebody kind of like in the normal world that doesn't run in the conspiracy world, as we crazies do, they don't realize how coordinated everything is. That somebody just happened to write a movie in 1973 that it just amazingly relates to all the scaremongering that's happening now with Al Gore and everyone else. No, it's all part of the general coordination. And on its own, in terms of a sample size of one, that's crazy, of course. But if anybody would ever sit down with us, for example, if we went into a Marriott and we booked us all into the room together, we could show you thousands of these examples. Therefore, it's no longer a coincidence when not just Soylent Green, but we have thousands more. But nobody wants to spend 48 hours with people like us booked into the room. So you have to just take our word for it that the world just doesn't really work the way you think, and you should expand your mind outside the bookends. Thanks for listening.